It was great. It really was. And we kind of grew together. And he did have that music right here and right here.
She sang the national anthem at the Super Bowl, and half of America called her a traitor. She walked out of Motown after outsinging Diana Ross and got punished for it. She lost $1 million looking for her missing child. She gambled away a fortune, quit in a single meeting, and then won a Grammy in a church. This is not a feel-good story about a music legend. This is the full story of Gladys Knight, and it is far stranger, far harder, and far more extraordinary than anything you have heard before. The throne she still sits on. On December 4, 2022, Gladys Knight sat in the presidential box at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. She was 78 years old. Beside her sat President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. The room was filled with every kind of power that America can assemble in one place. And every person in that room was there for her. She had been honored that year alongside actor George Clooney, singer Amy Grant, composer Tanya Leon, and the band U2 as one of 5 Kennedy Center honorees. But there was a moment during that evening that captured something no award could fully hold. At the State Department dinner, held the night before the official ceremony, before the cameras were rolling, and before the formal program had begun, Gladys Knight simply stood up and started singing. No microphone, no backing track, just her voice, filling the room. George Clooney, a confessed admirer of hers, later described what it felt like to be standing next to her in that moment. He said that 300 people in the room went completely still, that the whole thing felt transcendent. And then he laughed because he had to follow her. He said it was the worst position anyone could be placed in. Patti LaBelle, her friend of 6 decades, stood on the stage that night with a massive sign reading the word Gladys lit up behind her and called Knight her everything. LL Cool J told the crowd that he once heard Gladys sing the alphabet and thought he was in church. Garth Brooks performed Midnight Train to Georgia as part of her tribute. President Biden addressed her directly during the ceremony. He said her voice had spoken to what breaks hearts, what tears people apart, what lifts spirits, and what brings human beings together. Knight's response was characteristically grounded. She said she could never have told herself as a young girl that she would one day be honored on a stage like that, and that it simply would not have seemed possible. But 3 years before that night in Washington, she had stood in a very different kind of spotlight. In January 2019, when the NFL announced that Gladys Knight would sing the national anthem at Super Bowl 53 in Atlanta, the announcement did not land warmly. Rihanna had refused to perform. Cardi B had refused. Multiple artists had turned down the NFL in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick, the quarterback pushed out of professional football for kneeling during the anthem to protest racial injustice. And Gladys Knight said yes. The backlash came immediately. A message that circulated widely on social media told her she had lived through the era of Martin Luther King Jr., through Malcolm X, through the Black Panthers and the Freedom Riders, and asked how she could now stand on that field. Knight did not apologize. She put out a written statement that read like someone who had been waiting a long time to say exactly this. She wrote that she was there to give the anthem back its voice, to stand for its historic choice of words, and to free it from the same prejudices she had fought against all her life. She had been in the forefront of that battle longer than most of those voicing their opinions. She also made clear that she understood what Kaepernick was protesting. She said his cause was police violence and injustice. She argued that the national anthem had been dragged into that debate when both things, the anthem and the fight for justice, should each be able to stand alone. She then walked out onto the field in Atlanta, Georgia, the city where she was born, and delivered a performance that received a standing ovation. Every crown in that room at the Kennedy Center was earned through a war most of the audience never knew was being fought. And the first battle started when she was barely old enough to drive. The sound that refused to be second. When Gladys Knight and the Pips signed with Motown Records in 1966, The label's internal assessment of them was honest and brutal. Second string. They had 3 chart credits between them. Motown was built around one artist above all others, and that artist was Diana Ross. The Supremes were the face of the label, the gold standard, the act that Berry Gordy had chosen to elevate above everything else. Knight and the Pips were brought in to open for the Supremes on tour. The invitation had come from both Gordy and Ross themselves. They were being given a chance, a respectable slot on a prestigious tour, and nobody expected them to do anything more than warm up the room. But Knight's voice refused to behave like a supporting act. Night after night, she walked onto that stage and sang with everything she had. The audiences responded. Not politely, the way they respond to an opener, but genuinely. The way they respond to someone who has stopped them cold. Standing ovations for an opening act. That was the problem. A message came backstage after one of those nights. Berry Gordy wanted them off the tour. Knight had not done anything wrong. She had simply been too good. The feud lasted 37 years, hidden from the public until Knight revealed it in her autobiography. The two women did not reconcile until 2005. Motown did not drop them. What followed was one of the most productive eras of Knight's career, even under conditions of institutional neglect. In 1967, Gladys Knight and the Pips recorded "I Heard It Through the Grapevine" and took it to #1 on the R&B chart. This is the detail that music history has largely buried. She recorded that song before Marvin Gaye did. Motown held Gaye's version for an entire year. When his version became the cultural touchstone, Knight's faded from the conversation. The industry simply decided it didn't matter. They kept recording. "If I Were Your Woman" in 1970. "Neither One of Us" in 1972, which won a Grammy. The hits kept coming, but the treatment never changed. In 1973, they left Motown and signed with Buddha Records. The label that had treated them as second tier would now watch from a distance. Their first single under Buddha was "Midnight Train to Georgia." It reached #1 on both the pop and R&B charts. It won a Grammy. The song had originally been written by a country songwriter named Jim Weatherly and was called "Midnight Plane to Houston," a fact that says everything about what Knight's voice was capable of doing to a piece of music. She could take a country song about a man and a plane and turn it into the defining sound of a generation. What followed was a run that would define a decade. "I've Got to Use My Imagination," "Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me," "The Way We Were." In 1974, they recorded the entire soundtrack for the film Claudine alongside Curtis Mayfield. In 1985, Knight joined Dionne Warwick, Elton John, and Stevie Wonder to record "That's What Friends Are For," an AIDS benefit single that hit #1 on 3 separate charts and won the Grammy for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal. In 1989, she recorded the theme for the James Bond film License to Kill. It was a top 10 hit in the UK and Germany. By the time the final counting was done, her career had produced 7 Grammy Awards, 11 #1 R&B singles, 6 #1 R&B albums, and 2 #1 Billboard Hot 100 singles. The woman they had tried to keep in second place had built a catalog that outlasted everyone who underestimated her. But the woman behind that musical empire was simultaneously watching her personal life collapse, one marriage at a time, in ways the hit records never captured. 4 times she said yes. Before the first marriage, something happened that almost never gets mentioned. At 15 years old, Gladys Knight survived an attempted sexual abuse at her home. She was a teenager who had already been on national television, already winning competitions, already being told she was destined for something larger. And then something happened that left a wound that was never publicly treated and never really went away. She walked into her first marriage already carrying something heavy. That context matters. She was 16 when she married James Newman, her classmate. She was pregnant. In Atlanta, Georgia, in 1960, You got married. The pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, alone in a hotel room while on tour. 2 children came after, her son Jimmy, born in August of 1962, and her daughter Kenya, born in November of 1963. Newman developed an addiction and eventually abandoned the family when Knight was just 20 years old. She stepped away from performing to raise her children. The Pips continued touring without her. She came back in 1964, not because the situation at home had been resolved, but because raising 2 children alone required money. Newman died in the mid-1970s, a few years after they finally divorced in 1973. She met Barry Hankerson in 1974, a political operative and executive aide to the mayor of Detroit. She married him that same year. Their son, Shanga Ali Hankerson, was born in August of 1976. By 1977, the couple had relocated from Detroit to Atlanta, separating Knight from the Pips and fracturing the group's working dynamic for years. In 1979, the marriage ended. What followed was a custody battle that Knight has described as an emotionally devastating period. Not just the legal fight, but the sustained psychological toll of a prolonged dispute over a child she had already been raising in difficult circumstances for years. And then Shanga vanished. Knight mobilized every resource she had. She spent over $1 million searching for her son. In 1979, that was not a symbolic figure. That was the kind of expenditure that hollows out an account, turning a career's worth of earnings into something that must be rebuilt from scratch. Combined with what was coming next, it would push her toward ruin within a few years. In 1995, she married Les Brown, one of the most recognized motivational speakers in America. The marriage lasted 2 years. They divorced in 1997, the same year she was baptized into a new faith. 2 endings and 1 beginning in the same calendar year. In 2001, she married William McDowell. He was not from the entertainment industry. He was not a famous man. And that turned out to be exactly what she needed. Their marriage has now lasted over 2 decades, longer than her first 3 marriages combined. They settled in Fairview, North Carolina. Together, they purchased a former high school in Asheville and converted it into a community center. Their combined family includes 17 grandchildren and 10 great-grandchildren. The timeline of 4 marriages does not capture what happened in the most devastating stretch between them. Because during that period, a child disappeared, and a mother's entire fortune was not enough to guarantee his return. A mother who spent $1 million to find her son. 1979 was already the worst year of Gladys Knight's personal life before the kidnapping happened. The marriage to Barry Hankerson was collapsing. The custody fight over their son Shanga Ali had begun. The emotional damage of those 2 things happening simultaneously would have been enough to break most people. And then Shanga vanished. Knight spent over $1 million searching for him. $1 million in 1979 represented a staggering personal expenditure, even for a recording artist with multiple Grammy Awards and a string of #1 singles. Combined with what was about to develop into a decade-long gambling addiction, that search marked the beginning of a period of financial ruin she would not fully escape for years. The kidnapping and its resolution are not details Knight has discussed extensively in public. What is documented is the financial aftermath and the psychological weight it placed on everything that came after. When someone you love is missing and you have money, you spend the money. And when the crisis is over, you are left in a different place than where you started, trying to rebuild something that was already fragile. What often gets overlooked is who kept the professional side of things running during the worst of the personal chaos. Her firstborn son, Jimmy Newman, graduated from the University of San Diego in 1984 with a business degree and went directly into managing his mother's career through Newman Management, Inc. Jimmy had been raised Catholic but was searching for more. He and his wife, Micheline, investigated the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, joined, and their lives visibly changed. Jimmy guided his sister Kenya toward the same faith. Kenya encouraged their mother. In August of 1997, 5 years after Jimmy had been baptized, Gladys Knight was baptized by her son. He told her, after her conversion, to continue doing the music she loved. He said she had been there and done that she needed to do the music that was in her heart. On July 10, 1999, Jimmy Newman died of heart failure at 36 years old, survived by his wife, 2 daughters, and 3 sons. He had baptized his mother into her new faith 2 years earlier. The man who had performed that baptism was gone, and the woman who had spent $1 million searching for one child was now grieving another. The response Knight built to loss and hardship followed a consistent pattern. She directed resources toward people who needed them. In 2017, she supported a fundraiser for children's learning centers in Fairfield County that raised $400,000. Her philanthropic work has consistently been pointed toward children's education and the well-being of the communities that shaped her. The $1 million spent searching for Shanga was only the beginning of the financial devastation, because a few years earlier, she had found a place where she could lose that kind of money in a single night, and she kept going back. The casino knew her name. Gladys Knight had built her entire public identity around sobriety. She did not drink. She did not use substances. She had watched her first husband destroy himself with narcotics and had refused to follow him in that direction, which is part of why the gambling addiction caught her completely off guard. She was living in Las Vegas in the early 1980s, describing herself as something close to a hermit. She would perform, then return immediately to her room. The life of a touring artist is one of sustained exposure. Airports, lobbies, autograph requests, people who want something from you at all hours. She had been living inside that exposure since she was 8 years old. The casino offered something she had not realized she was missing. Inside, behind the red velvet ropes of the high roller section, the pit bosses and the dealers knew her name. They were professionals who treated her like a regular, not fans performing affection for access. She later wrote in her autobiography that the pit bosses and dealers had become her family, that she felt protected there. A fellow musician introduced her to blackjack. She played. She enjoyed it. Then she started winning. And that, she has said, was the real problem. Winning is how the casino gets you. You believe that you have a skill, that you have an edge, that you can read the table. You cannot. But winning feels exactly like you can. The addiction deepened in a specific way. When her children got to college, money was tight. They would call needing textbooks or help with tuition. She would go to the casino, win, and feel like she had solved the problem. Winning is how they get you. The losses escalated across more than a decade. The pattern of a compulsive gambler is not that they lose every time. It is that they lose enough times, badly enough, to cancel out every win and then some. But it was not a losing session that broke the cycle. It was the opposite. She sat down at a blackjack table with $2,000. Within about 25 minutes, she had won $60,000. She sat at the same table and gave every dollar of it back. And she got physically sick at the table. Not metaphorically. She felt ill, sitting there, watching what she had just done. She also realized at that moment that it was morning, that she had been at the table all night, that her son was at home and needed to get ready for school, and she was not there. She got up, she walked to a phone, she called Gamblers Anonymous. The woman on the other end of the line asked her where she was and said they would come get her. Knight went to one meeting. After more than a decade of compulsive gambling, it took one meeting. She has credited not just the program, but a spiritual intervention for the speed of her recovery. She rebuilt her finances. She rebuilt her professional standing. And when people asked her years later whether the casino still called to her, she said something simple and final. She said she does not hear them anymore. The woman who quit gambling in a single meeting was already in the middle of a different kind of transformation, one that would take her from a Baptist church in Atlanta through the Catholic faith of her Detroit years and into the most unexpected spiritual home of her life. The faith that rewrote her identity. Gladys Knight's mother, Sarah Elizabeth Knight, belonged to the Wings Over Jordan Gospel Choir. Her father sang in the church choir too. Music and faith arrived together in that household, bound so tightly that for the rest of her life, Knight would never really separate them. But the specific container that faith lived in kept changing. She was born Baptist and sang at Mount Moriah Baptist Church in Atlanta from the age of 4. During the Detroit years, the years of Motown and touring and raising children in a complicated marriage, she converted to Catholicism and sent her children to Jesuit Catholic grade school. She was always searching for a fuller version of what she believed. Her son Jimmy was the one who found the next destination. He and his wife Micheline had been raised Catholic but were looking for more. Through family connections, Jimmy came into contact with missionaries from the LDS Church. They studied the faith, were baptized, and their lives visibly changed. His sister Kenya followed, and then Kenya began encouraging her mother to come and see. Knight has described what ultimately moved her. She said she had raised her children to seek the Lord, that the family had been searching for the best of the Lord. When she watched the lives of her son and daughter after their conversions, when she saw how her grandchildren were being raised and what they knew, she said it impressed her deeply. In August of 1997, Jimmy baptized her into the church. What she brought to the LDS Church was not quiet reverence. It was Gladys Knight. In the year 2000, she was invited to perform at LDS President Gordon B. Hinckley's 90th birthday celebration, held at the church's conference center in Salt Lake City, filled to its 21,000-person capacity. She sang. The audience was moved. And then she did something no one expected. She turned to President Hinckley, with him standing right beside her at the podium, and she told him that she needed to clarify something. She said she loved the music of the church as she loved the church itself, and that she simply had to acknowledge that she might experience a little withdrawal from the foot-stomping and hand-clapping she was used to. Hinckley laughed. He agreed. And from that moment of honesty, the Saints Unified Voices Gospel Music Choir was born. The choir formed in 2002, based in the Las Vegas Valley, affiliated with the LDS Church. It was a volunteer organization of more than 100 members, a multicultural choir whose vocalists traveled from as far as Los Angeles and Utah for rehearsals. Their first public performance was on August 11, 2002, the 5-year anniversary of Knight's baptism at the Las Vegas Green Valley Stake Center. In January of 2005, they released their debut album called One Voice. It hit #1 on Billboard's Hot Shot debut chart. It hit #1 on the Gospel Album chart on iTunes. It stayed in the Gospel Top 40 for 48 weeks. And then it won the Grammy Award for Best Gospel Choir or Chorus Album. Knight's response to winning the Grammy was characteristic. She presented the award to President Hinckley and said she wanted it to go straight to church headquarters because she did not want her choir members getting big-headed. In 2018, she led the B1 Choir at a historic celebration in Salt Lake City, marking the 40th anniversary of the revelation that extended priesthood ordination to all worthy men. A landmark moment in LDS Church history that Knight chose to mark with her voice and her leadership. And her husband, William McDowell, the man she married in 2001, the man she specifically chose because he was not from the entertainment industry, had been quietly studying the LDS faith on his own without telling her. Everyone around them knew. She was the last to find out. She learned of his decision the day before his baptism. She has described it as one of the most unexpected gifts of her life. The woman who transformed the music of an entire church first learned what music could do when she was 4 years old. And by the time she was 8, a television audience across the entire country had already heard what she was. The girl from Atlanta who started it all. On May 28, 1944, Gladys Maria Knight was born in Atlanta, Georgia. Her father, Merrill Woodlow Knight Sr., was a postal worker. Her mother, Sarah Elizabeth Knight, was a woman of deep faith and strong musical instinct. Both parents sang in the Wings Over Jordan Gospel Choir and had a local group of their own. Music in that household was not background noise. It was practice. It was the language the family used to talk to God and to each other. She began singing at Mount Moriah Baptist Church when she was 4 years old. She has said that she would have preferred making mud pies or climbing trees. Her mother had other ideas. The instruction was constant. This voice is a gift from God, and you are meant to share it. On July 1, 1952, Gladys Knight walked onto the stage of Ted Mack's original amateur hour and sang a Nat King Cole song called Too Young. She was 8 years old. She won the $2,000 first prize. She was the youngest winner in the show's history at that time. The competition had been her mother's idea, a practical expression of the belief that what Gladys had needed to be seen by more than just the congregation at Mount Moriah. 1 year later, in 1953, the group that would become Gladys Knight and the Pips was born at a birthday party because a record player broke. The birthday party was for her brother Bubba, who was turning 10. The record player stopped working. Rather than let the music stop, Gladys, Bubba, their sister Brenda, and cousins Eleanor and William Guest stepped in and sang together. The room responded. Their mother Elizabeth watched and told them to keep going. Then she told them to formalize it. They named themselves the Pips after their cousin and early manager James "Pip" Woods. In 1957, they signed with Brunswick Records. Gladys was 13. During those years, they opened for Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke, learning what it meant to be a professional performer in rooms built by people who had already mastered it. Brunswick dropped them in 1959. Brenda Knight and Eleanor Guest stepped away to start families. Two cousins, Edward Patton and a friend named Langston George, joined as replacements. The version of the group that would eventually make history was taking shape. In 1961, without a label behind them, they recorded Every Beat of My Heart, written by Johnny Otis, and got it distributed through VJ Records. The song climbed the charts. Then they went to New York to audition for Fury Records and discovered their record was charting without them seeing a dollar. Bobby Robinson had them re-record it and released a competing version. Both charted simultaneously, the original hitting number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was an early and brutal education. Someone had taken their work and was profiting from it without them. Knight stored that lesson, and it informed every negotiation she made for the rest of her career. Letter Full of Tears became a top 40 hit in early 1962 and confirmed their commercial viability. That same year, Langston George left the group, and Knight stepped away temporarily for her growing family. She returned in 1964, and in 1966 they signed with Motown, the label that would underestimate them, restrict them, and eventually watch them walk away to become who they were always going to be. Oprah Winfrey once said, "Gladys can really sing." That was already obvious in 1952 when she was 8 years old winning $2,000 on national television, and in 1953 when her family turned a broken record player into the beginning of a group that would define an era. The girl on that stage was already carrying a musical lineage and a family's hopes. She would carry both for the rest of her life. What makes her story remarkable is not that the weight was heavy, it is that she never once put it down. That is the story of Gladys Knight. And if any part of it stayed with you, if any moment landed somewhere you didn't expect, tell us which one in the comments below.